All right, everybody, we on North Shepherd. You know, one thing about Shepherd Street, it was the street that goes from the north side to the south side. And Shepherd used to be a highway until they built I-45. And right now, we're right here at the beginning of West Montgomery. In fact, West Montgomery is the main drag street that goes into Acres Home. Here in Houston, we had 6 wards, and these are the drag streets out of each one of those wards. When you was in first ward, your main drag street would be Crockett. When you was in second ward, your main drag street would be Canal. When you was in third ward, your main street would be Dowling, which eventually turned into Emancipation Avenue. And when you was in fourth ward, your main drag street would be West Dallas. And when you was in fifth ward, your main drag street would be Limes Avenue. And when you was in sixth ward, your main drag street would be Studemont. But right now, we're beginning to go into Acres Home. Acres Home was the first black community outside of Houston. This was not part of Houston until 1967. And the thing about Acres Home, when they, after World War II, in 1918, they did not sell any lots out here in Acres Home. All the land out here was very cheap for black folks, so this was a part of the country. And you only had to buy acres. There was no lots being sold out here in Acres Home. Everything was sold by acres. That's why the name of the community came up as Acres Home. But now when it really started, it started at Airline, Texas, which was a little bit outside of Airline. And one thing about out here in Acres Home, and as you can see, we on the main drag street, which is West Montgomery. And there's Orlando's. Orlando's are also part of 5th Ward. And Orlando's all up and down here. What you might see on West Montgomery was nothing but beer joints and cafes. And like I say, this was not part of the Houston city limits. And you also had a place out here called Lincoln City. And you also had another one out here called Garden City. This was the largest black community in the city of Houston when they annexed it. Blacks were living all back up in here, and they still live all back up in here. And this is part of Acres Home. And first of all, this is the place where our mayor, Sylvester Turner, was raised up out here in Acres Home. A lot of great Houstonians came out of Acres Home, such as Major Adams, the father of Yolanda Adams. You had Lester Milburn. You had a Major Adams. And right here is one of the busiest corners in Acres Home. It's on the corner of West Montgomery and Little York. And one thing about out here in Acres Home and West Montgomery, this is the home of Paradise North. It was where most of all the blacks that was being buried was buried out here in Paradise North, including 3rd Ward, 4th Ward, and 5th Ward. This was the largest black cemetery that we had here in Houston. And as we go down here to West Montgomery, one thing about West Montgomery, you seen that we came off of Shepherd. And Shepherd was a highway. And West Montgomery ran into another highway, which is 249, leading out towards Tomball. But this Acres Home area is rich, full of history. And when these kids out here in Acres Home had to go to school, remember this was not part of Houston until 1967. And then when Houston did annex it, they only annexed 725 acres. When they completely annexed the whole Acres Home, it was in 1976. And one thing about out here in Acres Home, where these kids have to go to school. They can, HISD did not have a school out here for them until the late 50s. And then they didn't have a high school. The high school that they had to go to was Booker T. Washington, and they only moved it in the 1959. Before 1959, all of these kids out here in Acres Home, if they wanted their high school diploma, they had to go way out the Fifth Ward to get their high school diploma. Now, this is another major drag street in Acres Home. It's called South Victory. But right now, we're going on down the famous street of West Montgomery. But as I was saying, in the high school, even when they built the new Booker T. Washington and left out of Fourth Ward and came out here to Studewood, which it really ain't Studewood. The name of the place is Independent Heights. We just lost our history, and we still calling it Studewood. But it's all good, because in the record book, it's Independent Heights. And as we go down West Montgomery, heading towards Highway 249, which we know it as Mount Houston. And these kids had to go way out to Fifth Ward to get their high school diploma out there on Phyllis Wheatley, that was located at that time on Lyons Avenue, right off of Grigg. And then when they did build and move Booker T. Washington out here, most of these kids could not go to Booker T. Washington Junior High, because Booker T. Washington was a junior and a senior high school. And junior and senior high school, junior started in the 7th grade, and you stayed at that same school until you graduated in the 12th grade. There was no senior high school out here in Acres Home. And when they built MC Williams, and if the kids wanted to go to junior high school out here, they would have to go way to 6th Ward and go to Harper. But as we go down here, down West Montgomery, we're in Acres Home. Welcome everybody to Acres Home. And one thing about it, when they built Booker T. Washington out here, all of these kids could not go to Booker T. Washington if they was in junior high school. Junior high school started from the 7th to the 9th grade. They would have to go to Harper, because Booker T. Washington was too crowded in the 1960s when they opened it up out here in Studewood, which is Independent Heights. They did not have enough room for the 7th and 8th grade kids out here in Acres Home, so they had to go way to Harper out on Washington Avenue in Studemount. As we go down West Montgomery, this is another part of what they might call Garden City. You know, when you was at Lincoln City, you was at the corner of Lear York and West Montgomery. Right now, you're in Garden City, and you're on the corner of West Montgomery and Gulf Bank. This is one of the largest. Acres Home was the largest black community in the United States. Everybody, let me let you understand how valuable this land is out here and how much rich history it got out here in Acres Home. This was the largest black community in the United States, was here in Harris County, because it wasn't in Houston yet. It was still part of Harris County. And when they did annex Acres Home, sources told me that they really didn't want to annex Acres Home because there was too many black people out here. And there's the famous spot of Paradise North, one of the first black cemeteries in the 50s and the 60s. All right, everybody, let's take a ride down Paradise North Cemetery, because this is so much rich history out here. I got an uncle that's out here, and a lot of other blacks was coming out here to get buried before Houston Memorial Garden on the south side was built. But this is the famous spot of Paradise North. because they got a Paradise South over there in Pearland, right before you get to Houston Memorial Garden. But this is the famous cemetery of Paradise North as we go cruising through Paradise North. Welcome to Acres Home, everybody. The home of our mayor, Sylvester Turner, which is, I would say, one of the greatest mayors that I've been around in 72 years. Because he know about the city. He understand about the city. He was raised in the city of Acres Home. And all of this is Acres Home and Paradise North, which at one time was the biggest cemetery we had in Houston up until lately. The Houston Memorial Garden took over. And one thing about Acres Home, they was very independent. They didn't need Houston for nothing. They had their own bus service out here, and the buses would go through the neighborhood and pick up everybody out of Acres Home, and the bus would take them all the way to downtown Houston. And the bus the way it would travel would come on out West Montgomery to Shepherd, like you seen, and from Shepherd all the way on into Washington Avenue, and all the way down Washington Avenue to downtown Houston. And when it goes through downtown Houston, most likely, you know, it stopped at Polish. And when it come back and it turn around there on Bell Street, and when it turn around on Bell Street, it come back on Travis. And when it come back on Travis, then it would pick up all the people, the black people who lived out here in Acres Home. It would pick them up on Travis. Most of the people that would catch that bus, where would really be crowded at, I remember, is in the back of Polish, right there on the corner of Travis and Lamar. But all of this is part of Acres Home, the rich history of Acres Home. And it was the largest black community in the United States. And my sources told me, this is just a rumor now, that they took so long to annex Acres Home because there were so many black votes out here. And they didn't want them black votes to control the city of Houston. So that's, my source told me why it took them so long to annex Acres Home, and why they annexed partial of Acres Home one time in 1967, and they finished annexing the rest of Acres Home in 1976. And my sources was telling me that it was a rumor that Houston took so long to annex Acres Home because there were so many black votes out here, and they didn't want the blacks to have that kind of power. Just a little history for you that you ain't gonna be able to Google up. Now we ride through this area here, and you can't go through Acres Home without mentioning Antioch Baptist Church with Floyd Williams. You can't go through Acres Home without mentioning some of the great grocery stores they had out here, such as Orlando's, such as Ken, that's right up here on the corner of West Montgomery and Little York. And then you had a big store out here called Thriftway. You know, one reason why Weingarten never came out here, because it was never part of Houston city limits. And Weingarten tried to stay inside of Houston city limits in the 50s and even in the 60s. Now we're going down one of the major streets that runs out into Acres Home, coming out West Montgomery, and that's Victory Street. Now Victory Street is the most popular street out here in Acres Home. That's George Washington Carver. Now one thing about George Washington Carver is that it always been, when segregation was coming in, and that was in, there's another popular street, Carver. All the black kids that lived out here, they had to go to Aldine School District, and that was an all-white school district, but they had one black school, and that was Aldine Carver, that was out here in Sunnyside. Out here in Acres Home. And one thing what they did do, Houston always was part of helping the education out here in Acres Home. So they let all the black kids out of Aldine Carver, they let them compete against the black kids in Houston, such as Wheatley, Yates, Cashmere, Booker T. Washington, and Worthing. But they was not in the same conference as Jack Yates and the black school. All right, everybody, we're live right here at Sylvester Turner Park, right here on Victory. Let's go in and tour the park of Sylvester Turner Park here on Victory in Acres Home. Now this is what you call leaving a legacy. Bob Watson was the first and only black general manager for the Houston Astros. That's why you see this ballpark. Boy, this is what I call legacy. Thank you, Acres Home, for keeping our black legacy alive. Let's take a tour and look at the beautiful place of Sylvester Turner Park. Look at that, there's Jim Wynn.